There were 4 of them. 1 blocked the exit. 1 grabbed her wrist. 1 was already filming. And the last one leaned in close and said the word directly into her ear, like he owned the air between them. They had no idea who she was. They saw a 22-year-old woman alone in a corridor at 2 a.m, and they made the oldest mistake men like them ever make. They assumed alone meant defenseless. Standing beside her was a German shepherd with amber eyes who had already made his assessment and was waiting for one word. She gave it to him. What happened next, they will spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. Drop your city in the comments right now. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because what this dog did was only half the story. The other half is what she had already built before they ever walked through that door. Lieutenant Kara Voss stepped off the transport at Fort Calder at 1400 hours with 1 duffel bag over her shoulder and a hardened leash case in her left hand, and the particular expression of a person who has already read every piece of paper about this place and has decided not to let any of it show on her face. The base looked standard. That was the first thing she noted. Not because standard meant safe, but because standard was the specific aesthetic that facilities with something to hide tended to maintain with the most effort. Clean signage, functional perimeter, everything exactly where a base inspection checklist would expect to find it. She had been on enough bases to know that the cleaner the surface, the harder it was worth looking underneath. A second lieutenant jogged up to meet her, clipboard in hand, smile calibrated to polite without being warm. Lieutenant Voss, welcome to Fort Calder. Your quarters are prepped in Bravo Wing. The CO is out until afternoon, but the deputy is available. Kara said, "Where is the K9 Annex?" The lieutenant blinked. "I was told to run you through the admin check-in first, and then logistics would—" "K9 Annex," she said again. Same tone, not impatient, final. He told her. She was already walking before he finished the sentence. Her official orders described a standard K9 integration assessment. Evaluate handler pairing metrics. Review readiness protocols ahead of joint operations drills. The kind of assignment that put administrators to sleep. That was the point. The second set of orders, sealed under an authority level the base commander did not have clearance to read, told a different story. 3 female personnel transferred off base in 8 months. Reassignment paperwork that traced to receiving units, with no record of those personnel arriving. 2 formal conduct complaints marked resolved, with no investigation attached. 1 K9 handler named Private Dana Reese, who filed a grievance in March and was listed as voluntarily separated from service by April. No separation agreement existed in her file. The file itself barely existed. Kara had read all of it twice on the flight down. She had memorized the names and the layout of the K9 Annex from schematics that were not in open circulation. She had not memorized the faces because she did not need to. She already knew the type. She had known the type since she was 19. She collected Ajax from the transport kennel at the rear of the annex building. He stepped out of the crate and sat at her left heel without being asked. The airman managing the transport looked at the dog and then at Kara, with the expression of someone witnessing something that happened faster than expected. "Most of them take 15 minutes after transport to settle," the airman said. "He is already settled," Kara said. She checked his harness. He checked her face. They had been doing this particular exchange for 3 years. It had never required more than 4 seconds. Ajax was a decorated military working dog with 2 overseas deployments and a handler record that was classified above the base commander's pay grade. He did not bark before he moved. He did not move before she gave him the word. That combination had saved her life 4 times. She was prepared for it to be 5. She walked the base for the first 24 hours without doing anything that looked like investigation. She attended the readiness briefing. She reviewed the handler training logs. She ate in the chow hall at standard meal times and kept her eyes at a level that said she was not looking at anything in particular, while she was looking at everything. Fear has a sound. Not the acute kind, not the sharp intake of breath before something explodes, but the longer kind. The kind that has been learned over weeks and months and has settled into the body so deeply that the person carrying it no longer recognizes it as fear. They recognize it as normal. She had been in enough places to know the difference between women who moved carefully because they were trained and women who moved carefully because they had been taught, by repeated experience, that being noticed was more dangerous than being invisible. Fort Calder had the second kind. She saw it within the first morning. Near the chow line, a corporal named Torres reached for a tray, and her shoulder caught the edge of the rack and everything slid. The noise was minor. What was not minor was the 4-second pause before she bent to pick it up. Not clumsiness, not carelessness. The specific calculation of a person checking who was watching before she made herself visible by doing something as ordinary as picking something off the floor. Kara logged it without reacting. In the corridor outside the briefing room, 2 female MPs were mid-sentence when a corporal she had not yet identified by name walked through from the opposite end. The sentence stopped. Not paused, stopped. Picked back up only after the door closed behind him. The woman who had been speaking did not finish the thought she had been in the middle of. She just moved to something else, something lighter, something that would not matter if it was overheard. Kara logged that too. She found the corporal's name by the end of the day. Brett Dunn, 27. He had a way of moving through a room that looked like ease, but was actually something else. Ease did not require an audience. What Dunn had required an audience at all times. He performed relaxed authority, the way certain men perform it when they have never once been told in any language they understood that the room was not theirs. She found the second name by end of day 2. Cole Haas. Larger, less careful. He provided Dunn with something essential, which was the laughter that tells the person being targeted that the people around them are not going to intervene. Without Haas, Dunn was a man performing for himself. With him, Dunn was a consensus. The third name took less than an hour to surface once she knew what she was looking for. Ryan Fitch, 22. He was rarely the one who initiated anything. He filmed it. He had a personal archive that he kept under the privately held belief that documentation was not the same as participation. The belief was incorrect, and he would learn how incorrect it was in a federal courtroom in 8 weeks. The fourth name came from the complaint logs. Sergeant First Class Derek Wall, 39. Administrative Supervisor for the K-9 and Training Integration Wing. 11 conduct complaints had crossed his desk in the last 14 months. He had filed 0. He had marked 7 of them resolved. 3 he had marked pending further review. 1 he had marked misfiled. Not a single one had reached Captain Lena Park, the base legal officer whose desk was 30 feet from Wool's office and who had spent 14 months working in a building with a fire in the walls and had never once been shown where the smoke was coming from. Kara looked at Wool's name in the routing logs on the afternoon of day 3 and stayed with it for a moment. Then she marked it and moved to the next thing. The next thing was the K-9 Annex corridor. She had been waiting to walk it properly. Not because she was afraid of it, but because she needed to be the right kind of unprepared when she went in. The kind of unprepared that looked real. The kind that said she had no idea what was in there, even though she had memorized the layout, the camera node positions, and the maintenance log that recorded 7 camera failures in the annex wing over the past 6 months, without a single repair completion. She went in at 0-100, Ajax at her left heel. No announcement. She walked at the pace of someone doing a routine check, not the pace of someone who had been building toward this for 3 days. The corridor smelled like bleach, and something underneath the bleach that bleach was not designed to cover. Ajax stiffened 6 steps in, not toward sound, toward something older. She had seen him do this once before, in a building in Bahrain, and the building had turned out not to be empty. She put her hand on his back. His muscles were rigid under her palm. His amber eyes were tracking forward with the fixed attention of an animal that has found a scent trail that has nothing to do with the present, and everything to do with what the walls were holding. She moved deeper. Near the far end, she found the bench against the wall. She crouched and ran her fingers along the base of the frame. Scratch pattern in the tile. Angled. Too deliberate for furniture drag. She looked at the surface of the bench and found it in the grain just below the line where the wood had been repainted. Thin letters, pressed hard. The kind of writing a person does when they have no other surface. 3 words. Should have stayed quiet. Kara did not move for a moment. Then she stood. She reached inside her collar seam and clipped the body cam to the interior edge. Legal under her sealed authority. Time-stamped. Encrypted. Logged to an off-site server that Wall did not have access to, and Dunn had never heard of. She tapped it once. A faint vibration confirmed it was live. She set the failsafe on her phone. 11 minutes. If she did not reset it manually, a coded message went to a preset contact and triggered an immediate duty response. Not because she was not confident, because confidence did not mean careless, and she had not survived 2 deployments and Bud/S by betting her life on expectations. She looked at Ajax. He was watching the far end of the corridor with his ears forward and his weight distributed evenly, and the specific stillness of an animal that has already made its assessment and is simply waiting to be asked to act on it. "Heel," she said quietly. He pressed against her leg. She kept walking. Slow. Ordinary. The posture of a person who had no idea what kind of men hunted in quiet hallways after midnight. Every step measured. Every sense open. The body cam recording. The failsafe running. She was not walking into this corridor unprepared. She was walking in as the most prepared person who had ever stood in it. And somewhere at the other end, 4 men were about to make the decision that was going to define the rest of their lives, and they had absolutely no idea. She heard them before the door opened. 4 sets of boots. That was the first thing. Not the sound of men walking a patrol route or running a late check. The specific cadence of men who had decided where they were going before they left wherever they started. 2 fast, 1 heavier with a slight drag on the right heel, 1 hanging back, moving quiet, posting near the exit end of the corridor before the others had fully entered. Kara did not turn. She bent at the knee like she was checking Ajax's harness buckle, and in the same motion, her right hand confirmed the body cam was still live. Faint vibration, still running. She straightened slowly and kept her eyes forward and waited. Ajax's weight shifted against her leg. Not a step, just a lean. The lean he made when he had already registered the threat and was communicating it to her with the only vocabulary available to him, without making a sound. She put 2 fingers on his collar. Light, not restraint, contact. The door clicked shut behind the last one. She turned around. Dunn stood closest, hands in his jacket pockets. The posture of a man browsing. His eyes moved over her once with the specific quality of someone taking inventory of something he had already decided belonged to him. He did not look at Ajax. That was the first mistake. Haas was to his right, shoulders rolled forward, the thick-necked ease of a man who had spent years understanding that his size communicated things before he had to. He was grinning the way people grin when they are in a crowd that has already agreed on the outcome. Fitch was near the lockers, phone out, thumb already hovering. He had positioned himself at the angle that maximized what the camera could capture, which told Kara everything she needed to know about how many times he had done this before. You did not find the right angle on the first attempt. You found it after practice. The fourth man had his back against the exit door, boot wedged under the frame, casual, deliberate. No one spoke yet. That silence was information. Predators did not open with noise. They opened with positioning, with the slow establishment of the fact that the exit was covered and the space was theirs before a single word was said. The silence was the first move. She had seen it before. She knew exactly what it was. Dunn spoke first. "Late for a walk, Lieutenant?" Low, controlled. The voice of a man who believed that keeping his register down made the conversation more intimate, more inevitable. "Didn't think anyone used this wing after midnight." Kara did not respond. "Nice dog," Haas said. He was not looking at Ajax. Fitch adjusted his angle slightly. The red recording light blinked on. Dunn took one step forward, not rushing, the step of a man who had done this enough times to know that measured movement created more fear than speed. "This wing is ours after hours. No cameras, no patrols." His head tilted just slightly. "You probably already noticed that." "Back up," Kara said. She said it the way she said most things. Quiet, flat. The voice that did not invite debate, because it was not making a request. Dunn smiled. "You sound tense." "Walk away," she said. "All four of you, right now." Haas laughed. It was the laugh that had been doing its job for years. The laugh that told everyone in earshot that the person on the other side of this was not being taken seriously. That their words were entertainment and nothing more. He looked at Dunn. "She's serious," he said, the way people say it when they mean the opposite. Dunn's smile did not change. "You're alone out here," he said, like it was a fact she had overlooked, like pointing it out was a kindness. Kara looked at him steadily. "I am going to tell you one more time." Dunn moved. Not a lunge. Not violent in the way people think of violence. He reached for her wrist with the calibrated grip of someone who understood that the first point of contact was about establishing the boundary of the other person's body, about demonstrating that the boundary was no longer theirs to control. His fingers closed around her skin, firm, practiced. 5 seconds, he said softly. "Make this easy." Ajax's shoulders went rigid. Kara did not look down at him. She kept her eyes on Dunn and said, at the same flat register she had used for everything else, "Take your hand off me." Dunn's grip tightened by a fraction. "Nobody is coming," he said. "Not in this wing." Haas moved behind her. She heard his belt buckle. The particular deliberate sound of someone who was not in a hurry because they had decided there was no reason to be. Fitch raised the phone higher. And then Haas said it, low, against the back of her ear. The word that was not about description. The word that was about reduction. The word that was meant to arrive first, so that everything that followed felt already arranged, already decided, already done. Ajax made no sound. He did not growl. He did not tense visibly. But under Kara's 2 fingers, she felt the exact moment his muscles loaded, the micro-shift in his weight distribution that she had felt 4 times before, in 4 different places in the world. The specific preparation of an animal who had spent 3 years learning to hold everything until the word came. She said it so quietly that Fitch, 3 feet away, did not hear it. Ajax came off the floor. He hit Haas's forearm mid-reach with the force of an animal that was not performing aggression, but executing a trained motor sequence with the same precision a surgeon used a scalpel. His jaws closed below the elbow, at the specific angle that his deployment training had taught him. The angle that controlled without severing, that stopped without destroying. He shook once, hard. Haas's scream was not a shout. It was involuntary. The sound a person makes when the body registers something before the mind is ready to process it. He went backward, and the lockers caught him, and he hit them with his full weight, and the metal rang through the corridor, and Haas went down, arm dragging, still screaming, not understanding yet what had happened, because it had happened faster than his brain could build a narrative around it. Dunn released Kara's wrist by reflex. She was already moving. Her free hand found his collar. Her hip turned. His weight redirected into the wall with the physics of a maneuver she had practiced until it was no longer technique, but instinct. His head met the concrete at exactly the force required to establish that he was no longer the person running this corridor. Not enough to fracture, enough to reset. He slid to one knee. She took 3 steps toward Fitch. He had not moved. The phone was still recording. The red light was still on. He was standing with both feet planted and both eyes wide, and the specific expression of a man whose certainty about how this was going to go had just been removed from him all at once. "Give me the phone," Kara said. He held it out without a word. She did not turn it off. She saved the file. She tapped the screen twice. Timestamp confirmed. Audio intact. Video continuous from the moment the recording started. She slid it into the evidence pouch at her belt and turned back toward the room. Dunn was on one knee, jaw tight, breathing through his nose in the fast, controlled way of a man managing pain and humiliation simultaneously. His hand found his belt. Multi-tool or a clip, she clocked the movement, before it finished and stepped toward him, and the hand stopped. "Don't," she said. He looked at Ajax, still holding Haas at the floor, and something shifted in Dunn's face. Not fear exactly. The recalibration of a man who has just understood for the first time that he is losing. It was a look she had seen on faces in other places and other contexts, and it always looked the same, because losing always looked the same when it arrived for the first time. He swung his boot at Ajax. Not hard, not deliberate. Reflex. The desperate physics of a man reaching for anything still available to him. The boot clipped Ajax's side. Ajax let go of Haas. He pivoted. 1 step for angle. And then he was on Dunn, with the same absence of performance, the same clean, decisive movement. Jaws on the posterior thigh, at the depth that ended the possibility of walking out of this corridor under your own power. Dunn's sound was different from Haas's. Haas had screamed from surprise. Dunn made a sound that was lower and more broken. The sound of a man who has just arrived at the place where his confidence used to live, and found nothing there. He went down flat. Ajax held the bite for exactly the right duration, then released, stepped back, sat, tongue loose, amber eyes steady on Kara, waiting. Fitch was in the corner with his hands raised, whispering something that sounded like he was talking to himself, or to God, or to the recording that was no longer in his possession. Haas was slumped against the lockers, one arm pressed to his chest, crying in the low, guttered way that had moved past pain into something more private. The 4th man at the exit had not moved. He had his hands slightly raised and his boot no longer wedged under the doorframe. He was looking at Dunn on the floor, and then at Kara, and his face was making the specific calculation of a man deciding how much of this he wanted to be formally attached to. Kara looked at him. "Step away from the door," she said. He stepped away. She reached into her collar seam and detached the body cam. She set it on the bench beside the evidence pouch and pulled out her phone and opened the incident logging application and began voice tagging the record without inflection or emphasis, just clean documentation, times and names and charges, each word going into the encrypted log that was simultaneously uploading to the off-site server that no one on this base had access to. She was still speaking when the duty MPs came through the door, 3 of them. The sergeant in front was still zipping his vest. He took in the corridor in pieces. 2 men on the floor, 1 against the lockers still making noise, 1 in the corner with his hands up, 1 woman standing untouched with a German shepherd at her left heel. He stood in the doorway and said nothing for 2 full seconds. "Stand down," he said finally, to everyone, and then, more carefully, to Kara. "Ma'am, I need you to step back from the subjects." Kara reached into her jacket, not fast, not sharp. She produced the badge wallet and opened it and held it out flat. She said her name, her rank, her clearance level, and the specific DoD directive under which her sealed inspection authority operated. The sergeant took the wallet and read it again. His jaw tightened. He looked at his team. "Weapons down," he said. "Nobody moves without the lieutenant's instruction." Dunn tried. Even then, even from the floor with blood on his fatigues and his leg not working, and the last 40 minutes of his life already on a time-stamped recording in federal evidence. He looked at the sergeant and said, voice cracked and bitter, "She set this up. She brought the dog in here to attack us. You can't just—" Kara tapped the screen on the recovered phone. She pressed play. Dunn's own voice came out of the speaker. Haas's belt buckle. Fitch's laughter. The word. Her wrist. The lockers. All of it. Clean, uncut. Timeline from the moment Fitch pressed record until the moment she took the phone from his hand. The corridor was completely silent when it finished. The sergeant exhaled through his nose. He did not look at Dunn. He looked at the 2 MPs behind him and said 4 words. "Get Wall down here." And Kara, who had been waiting for exactly that name to enter the room, allowed herself the specific, quiet satisfaction of a person who built something very carefully and has just watched it hold. Wall arrived 7 minutes after the sergeant called his name. He came through the corridor door in a clean uniform, with a clipboard in his hand, and the expression of a man who had spent years arriving at problems after they happened, and resolving them before anyone with authority could see what they actually were. He looked at Dunn on the floor, at Haas against the lockers, at Fitch in the corner. He looked at the 2 MPs kneeling beside the injured men. He looked at the sergeant, and then he looked at Kara. His face did the thing faces do when they are running 2 calculations simultaneously. The first was, what this looks like. The second was, how much of this can still be managed? "What happened here?" he said. His voice was the voice of institutional authority. Not loud, settled. The voice of a man who had walked into rooms like this before and talked them into becoming smaller rooms. The sergeant started to answer. Kara spoke first. "Sergeant First Class Wall," she said. "Stand where you are." Wall stopped. His chin came up slightly. "Lieutenant, I outrank—" "You do not outrank this," Kara said. She reached into her jacket and produced the sealed authority document for the 2nd time that night. She held it out and waited for him to read it, and she watched his face while he did. She watched the exact moment he understood what she was. It was not fear. Not yet. It was the specific recalibration of a man whose entire operating model had just been restructured around him while he was standing still. He had spent 14 months in a position where every complaint came to him first and left in a direction he controlled. He had never once considered that someone might come in from a direction he did not control at all. You have been the administrative supervisor for the Canine and Training Integration Wing for 14 months, Kara said. In that time, 11 conduct complaints were routed through your office. 0 reached Captain Park's desk. 0 were submitted to JAG review. 7 were marked resolved. 3 were marked pending. 1 was marked misfiled. She paused one beat. There is no such category as misfiled in the base conduct protocol. You created a designation that does not exist to make a document disappear. Wall's clipboard hand tightened. Those complaints were being reviewed on a case-by-case by you, Kara said. Exclusively by you, which is not how the protocol works, and you know it is not how the protocol works, because you wrote your own orientation summary for incoming personnel in this wing 2 years ago, and it describes the routing process correctly. She looked at him. You described it correctly because you needed new personnel to believe it worked the way it was supposed to. And then you made sure it did not. The sergeant behind her was not moving. Neither were his 2 MPs. The corridor had gone the specific quality of quiet that happens when a room full of people understand that they are watching something that matters, and the right thing to do is stay out of the way of it. Haas made a sound from the floor, low and involuntary. One of the MPs shifted toward him. Kara did not look away from Wall. The annex server, she said. I accessed the camera system logs this afternoon. The log shows manual disabling of 7 camera nodes in this wing over the past 6 months. Each entry traces to login credentials registered to your department code. She took one step toward him. Not threatening. Closing distance the way a person closes distance when they want to make sure the other person understands that there is nowhere left to look except directly at what is being said. The most recent deletion. 4 video entries from this corridor. Timestamp puts it at 10 minutes after a conduct complaint was marked resolved with no action. Your login. Your time. Your terminal. Wall said nothing. You did not just fail to act, Kara said. You actively removed evidence. Twice. The first time was 7 months ago, when a handler named Private Torres filed a written complaint with photographs attached. The photographs disappeared from the file 3 days after submission. The second time was 4 months ago, when the video file was deleted. She watched his face. And 1 month after that deletion, Private Dana Rice filed a complaint, was given a voluntary separation form she did not request, and was off this base within 3 weeks. Something moved through Wall's face at Rice's name. Something that was not guilt exactly, but was the closest thing to it that a man in his position could produce without fully admitting what he had done. His jaw tightened. His clipboard shifted to his other hand. Rice made a personal decision to, "No," Kara said. The word was not loud. It landed like a door closing. She did not, and we both know she did not. The corridor was completely still. Then Wall tried the last thing available to him. The thing men in institutional positions always tried when evidence was no longer on their side. He straightened. He looked at the sergeant. He said, with all the residual authority of 14 months of unchallenged administrative control, I think we need to handle this quietly. Whatever this looks like, we can resolve it through the proper channels without turning this base into a... Sergeant, Kara said, without looking away from Wall. Relieve him. The sergeant took 2 steps forward. Wall turned to face him. "You do not have the authority to—"
"I activated Climate Protocol Alpha under OSD review order at 0214 this morning," Kara said. "That authority transferred to my operational command the moment I logged the incident. You are relieved of administrative duty, effective now. You will surrender your access credentials and accompany the MPs to administrative holding." Wall's mouth opened. He looked at the sergeant. He looked at Kara. He looked at the clipboard in his hand like it was a life preserver, and he was trying to remember how life preservers worked. "This is not how this is supposed to go," he said, quietly. Not to anyone specific.
It was the statement of a man who had spent 14 months being very certain about how things were supposed to go. "No," Kara said, "it is not. It was supposed to go 11 complaints ago." She looked at the sergeant. "Take him." The clipboard dropped to the floor. No one picked it up. By 0400, the base had changed in ways that could not be undone by morning. The first thing Kara did after the corridor was cleared was issue a full device lockdown through the base IT security node. Every locker belonging to Dunn, Haas, Fitch, and Wall was tagged for immediate forensic review. Work devices, personal phones, shared access accounts. All of it locked down and flagged before anyone had a chance to access a delete function. She went to the Annex server herself. The manual disabling logs were exactly where she expected them to be. 7 entries. Wall's credentials. Clean timestamps. She pulled the full deletion record for the video files and found 4 entries in the Wing 2C folder, which was the Annex corridor she had just been standing in 40 minutes ago. The most recent deletion timestamp landed 10 minutes after a complaint resolution entry marked with Wall's administrative code. She built the chain of custody documentation for all of it and transmitted it to the off-site server before 0330. At 0345, she walked to Captain Park's quarters and knocked. Park answered in 30 seconds. Not groggy. The specific alertness of someone who had been sleeping lightly for reasons they had not been able to name. She looked at Kara in the doorway. She looked at Ajax at Kara's heel. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "How long?" 14 months of documented complaints, Kara said. None of them reached you. Park was quiet in a way that was not shock. It was the particular silence of a person who has just been handed the explanation for something that had not made sense for a long time. The personnel transfers that came with paperwork she never signed. The handler who left in April with a separation form that Park had not processed. The women in this wing who moved differently than women on other bases she had served on, and she had noticed it and told herself she was reading too much into it because there was no evidence coming across her desk, and no evidence meant no problem. There had been evidence. It had been sitting in Wall's routing queue and going nowhere for 14 months. "Who knows?" Park said. The duty MPs who responded. The sergeant. Wall is in holding. Dunn and Haas are in medical. Fitch is in administrative isolation. Kara paused. The base commander does not know yet. "I will handle the base commander," Park said. There was nothing in her voice that suggested the base commander was going to find that conversation comfortable. She stepped back from the door. "Come in. Show me everything." Kara sat at Park's kitchen table for 40 minutes and walked her through the complaint records, the deletion logs, the server entries, and the evidence chain from the corridor. Park read without interrupting. She turned pages with the focused speed of a legal officer who had processed enough documentation to read fast without missing the details that mattered. When she reached Wall's name in the routing logs for the 3rd time, her hands stopped on the paper. "He knew every complaint before it could reach me," Park said. "He was the first point of contact for every conduct matter in this wing,
Kara said. There was no parallel reporting path. He built it that way. Park set the page down. She looked at the table for a moment. Dana Rice. No current military address. No reassignment record.
I have a last known civilian location. I have not been able to confirm it yet. Park wrote the name on a notepad in front of her. She underlined it once. I will find her. She looked up. The women who are still here. Torres. How many are there? 4 confirmed who filed complaints that were buried. 2 additional who I believe have relevant information and have not yet filed. Kara paused. They have not filed because the filing process runs through the office of the man currently in administrative holding. Park's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. The shift of a person who has gone from processing information to deciding what to do with it. I am opening a protected intake channel before sunrise, she said. External routing only. No base administrative chain. JAG oversight on every submission. She looked at Kara. Can you be available for voluntary corroboration interviews tomorrow afternoon? Yes. Will Ajax be there? Kara looked at the dog. Ajax was watching Park with the calm, attentive, amber-eyed patience he reserved for people he had decided were not a threat, and were doing something worth supporting. He will be there, Kara said. Park nodded once. She looked at the complaint file in front of her, at 11 entries that should have reached her desk and had not, at the gap of 14 months between what the system was supposed to do and what it had done. I want you to know something, Park said. Her voice was steady and direct and carried no performance of any kind. What you built tonight, the documentation, the chain of custody, the way you walked in there with everything already in place. She paused. That is the only reason this survives a court-martial. Testimony without evidence gets managed. Evidence without testimony gets challenged. What you gave us is both, and it is airtight. She looked at Kara directly. You did not just stop what happened in that corridor. You stopped the system that let it happen. Kara did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, The system let it happen 11 times before tonight. Yes, Park said. It did. She did not look away. That is why we build the case clean enough that it happened 0 more times after. They sat there for a moment, in the particular quiet of 2 people who understand that they are inside the part of the work that does not feel like victory yet, because victory is a courtroom and a verdict, and they are still several weeks away from either of those things. Ajax padded across the floor and lay down between their chairs and put his chin on his front paws and exhaled slowly. The case was already built. Now came the part where they made sure the right people could not look away from it. The protected intake channel opened at 05:30. Park built it in 90 minutes, with external JAG routing and a submission address that bypassed every administrative layer on the base. She sent the access code to 6 people, all of them women, all of them currently assigned to Fort Calder. She did not explain how she had their contact information. She had been a legal officer for 19 years, and she had learned very early that the women on any base she served on always knew where to find each other, even when the official channels did not acknowledge they existed. By 700, she had 4 submissions. By 900, she had 7. Kara was in Park's office when the 7th came in. She watched Park read it, and watched Park's face go through several things in sequence before settling into the focused stillness of a person who has found the peace that changes the shape of everything. Torres, Park said. She turned the tablet toward Kara. Kara read it. Specialist Torres had filed 7 minutes after receiving the access code. The submission was 2 pages, single-spaced. The kind of writing a person produces
when they have been composing it in their head for a long time, and finally have a surface clean enough to put it on.
It detailed 4 incidents over a period of 5 months. 2 involved Dunn, 1 involved Haas. The 4th involved a third-party witness who had been present during an incident in the equipment bay adjacent to the canine annex, and had said nothing, and whose name Torres had included because she said she wanted the record to be complete, even if it was complicated. The 4th name was a female corporal named Yates, who had been assigned to the overnight logistics rotation for the past 7 months, and had walked past the annex corridor every shift, and had chosen the long route around it every single time, and had told herself it was because the short route added unnecessary wear to her duty boots. She knew, Kara said. She knew something, Park said. She is not the same as someone who stood there and filmed it. She looked at Kara. But she is part of what allowed it to continue, and she needs to be interviewed. She will talk, Kara said. The submission channel is open, and her name is already in the record. The decision about whether to come forward on her own or be called in has already been made for her. She paused. She will talk, and she will be relieved to talk. That is how people like Yates operate. They are not complicit because they believe in what is happening. They are complicit because they cannot find the door. Show them the door, and they walk through it. Park sent Yates a direct message through the intake channel at 09:15. Yates submitted her own statement at 09:43. It was 3 pages. It named 2 additional incidents she had witnessed and said nothing about. It ended with a single sentence that was not part of the formal documentation language, but that Park did not remove from the record. The sentence said, "I did not think anyone would believe me over them, and I am sorry it took someone else walking in that corridor for me to find out I was wrong." Park read it twice. Then she set the tablet down and looked at the wall for a moment. "How many bases have you done this on?" she said. "This is my 3rd sealed inspection," Kara said. "What happened on the first 2? "Courts-martial. Convictions. 1 base restructured its entire conduct routing protocol. The other is still working through the appeals." Kara looked at her. "The convictions held on both?" Park nodded slowly. "I want to talk about Rice." Kara had been waiting for this. Park had spent the early morning hours working the contacts she had built over 19 years of military legal work. She had called 3 people before sunrise. 2 of them owed her. 1 of them owed her significantly. By 800, she had a last known civilian address for Private Dana Rice. Savannah, Georgia, a hardware store on the east side. She had been working there for 4 months. There was no forwarding address in the military system, no record of where she went after the separation form was processed, because the separation form had not been processed through normal channels. It had been processed through Wall's office on a Saturday morning when Park was off base attending a legal conference, and the only administrator present was a junior clerk who signed what he was told to sign without understanding what he was signing. "She does not know the case exists," Park said. "She has been working at a hardware store for 4 months, thinking she voluntarily left military service. She filed a complaint, and 3 weeks later was handed paperwork and told it was for the best, and she believed it because she had no reason not to. Because the man who handed it to her was her administrative supervisor, and the man who had been processing her complaint. And she trusted that the system worked the way it was supposed to work." Park stopped. Her jaw was set. She trusted it, and it took everything from her. "I will call her," Kara said. "I think it should come from you," Park said. "I am a legal officer with the base that processed her out. Anything I say is going to land inside the institution that failed her. You are something different." "I am also the institution," Kara said. "You are," Park said, "but you are the part of it that came looking." She held Kara's eyes. That matters. It matters to people who have stopped expecting the institution to look. Kara called Rice at 1015 from a secure line. It rang 6 times. "Hello." The voice was careful, the careful of someone who had learned to answer unknown numbers with the minimum amount of self they could offer until they understood who was asking. "Private Rice, my name is Lieutenant Kara Voss. I am a Navy SEAL currently operating under a sealed inspection mandate at Fort Calder. I am calling because I need you to know something that you deserve to know." Silence. "You were separated from service 4 months ago through a paperwork process that was not authorized, not reviewed by the base legal officer, and not initiated by you in any legitimate sense." Kara kept her voice level, not gentle, direct, because Rice did not need to be handled. She needed to be told the truth by someone who was not going to qualify it. "Your conduct complaint was buried by your administrative supervisor. The video evidence you submitted was deleted from the base server. Sergeant First Class Derek Wall is currently in administrative holding, pending courts-martial. The men you filed against are in holding. The evidence is intact. The case is going to trial." The line was very quiet. "I filed that complaint 6 times, Rice said. "I know. They kept telling me it was under review." "It was never under review," Kara said. "It was being managed. There is a difference, and you knew there was a difference, and you were right." Another silence. Longer. Kara did not fill it. She had learned a long time ago that the silences people needed were not the ones that got filled. "I thought I was the problem," Rice said finally. Her voice was not breaking. It was carrying something heavy, and doing it carefully, the way a person carries something they have been holding alone for a long time and are not yet sure it is safe to set down. "You were never the problem," Kara said. "You were in a building where the problem had learned to dress itself up as the solution." Rice was quiet again. "What happens now?" she said. "Captain Park is the base legal officer, and she is building your record correction case today. Your separation was fraudulent. You have full grounds for reinstatement, back pay from the date of separation, and formal acknowledgement that your conduct complaint was not only valid, but directly contributed to a federal courts-martial." Kara paused. "What happens to those options is your decision. Not Wall's. Not Dunn's. Yours." "They are actually going to prison," Rice said. It came out like a question, but with the weight of something that needed to be said out loud before it could be believed. "Dunn and Haas are looking at dishonorable discharge and federal sentencing," Kara said. "Fitch entered cooperation. Wall is facing obstruction, evidence tampering, and dereliction. The evidence chain is complete and it is airtight." Rice made a sound. It was small and involuntary, and it was the sound of a person whose body had just released something it had been holding at tension for 4 months without permission to let it go. "I need a minute," she said. "Take it," Kara said. "I am not going anywhere." The courts-martial convened 3 weeks later. Dunn's attorney spent the first 2 days arguing entrapment. The argument required the jury to believe that Dunn had been manipulated into doing something he would not otherwise have done, which required ignoring the recording of Dunn doing exactly what he did, in exactly the manner he did it, with no prompting from anyone. And the jury was not willing to do that work. Haas's attorney argued peer pressure and diminished judgment. Haas was 24 years old and had 2 years of active combat training, and the argument sat in the courtroom exactly as well as it deserved to. On the second day of testimony, Fitch walked to the stand under his cooperation agreement and testified for 5 hours. He described 3 incidents he had filmed and archived. He described the moment in each one where he had understood what he was watching and had kept filming.
He described the specific reasoning he had used each time to tell himself that documentation was not participation. He said, at the end of the 5th hour, without being asked and without any visible performance of remorse, that the reasoning had never once been true, and he had known it was never once true, and he had used it anyway, because the alternative was doing something, and he had been afraid. No one in the room said anything when he stepped down. The base commander authorized full investigative access to all unit records on day 3, without being asked twice. He had read the evidence chain the night before. He had not slept. He authorized everything Park put in front of him, with the expression of a man who understood that the only remaining question was how much of this he had been responsible for by not looking hard enough. Park found the answer to that question on day 4. It was not a comfortable answer. She delivered it to him in a private meeting that lasted 20 minutes. What happened in that meeting stayed in that meeting. But the base commander submitted a formal request for external command review of his own tenure the following morning, and the base's entire conduct infrastructure was placed under OSD oversight review by end of week. Kara was sitting outside the courtroom on the last day of testimony when Ajax shifted beside her and put his head on her knee. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with amber eyes that carried the patient steadiness he always carried when the hard work was done and the outcome was no longer in her hands. She put her hand on his head. The evidence was in. The testimony was in. The chain was intact. What happened next belonged to the process, and the process had everything it needed to do what it was supposed to do. For the first time in 11 days, Kara allowed herself to sit still and let the work be finished. The verdicts came down on a Thursday. Kara was not in the courtroom when they were read. She had testified on day 2 and had not returned since, because she had learned on her first sealed inspection that watching a verdict land did not add anything to what the evidence had already accomplished. The evidence was the work. The verdict was the confirmation. She had stopped needing the confirmation to feel like the work was real. She was in the canine training yard with Ajax when Park called. She answered on the second ring. "Done," Park said. "Dishonorable discharge. 4 years Leavenworth. Reduction to E1. Forfeiture of all pay and allowances." A pause that held the weight of everything that had been built to produce those words. Haas. Dishonorable discharge. 3 years. Same forfeiture. Another pause. Wall. 18 months federal confinement. Permanent bar from federal service. Convicted on all 3 counts. Obstruction. Evidence tampering. Dereliction of duty. Kara did not say anything for a moment. "Fitch," she said. "Cooperation agreement held. 8 months suspended sentence. Dishonorable discharge." He walked out of the building this morning with the expression of a man who was going to be carrying what he did for considerably longer than 8 months. Park's voice was precise and without theater. He should. Ajax was watching Kara's face. He had been watching it since the phone connected. His amber eyes tracked every small shift in her expression, with the focused attention of an animal that had learned to read her the way she read field reports. Thorough, without assumption, looking for what was actually there. "The base commander," Kara said, "submitted his external review request and cooperated fully with OSD oversight. He is not facing criminal charges. He is facing the considerably less comfortable experience of watching his command record reflect 14 months of institutional failure that happened directly under his authority." Park paused. "I do not think he is a bad man. I think he is a man who learned to trust his administrative chain and stopped asking the questions that would have told him his trust was misplaced. That is its own kind of accountability." "And Torres?"
Torres submitted 3 additional complaints this morning through the external channel. 2 are actionable against personnel not connected to Dunn's group, a corporal in the logistics rotation, and a staff sergeant in the equipment bay adjacent to the annex. Park's voice was steady. We are moving on both. External JAG review. No base administrative involvement. Kara looked at Ajax. He was still watching her. You need to call Rice, Park said. I know. She has been waiting. I know, Kara said. I will call her now. She called Rice from the same secure line she had used before. It rang 3 times. Lieutenant Voss, Rice answered with her full name this time, not the careful, minimal hello of 4 weeks ago. She had been expecting the call.
She had probably been expecting it since morning.
The verdicts came in, Kara said. A sharp intake of breath, barely audible. The involuntary response of a body that has been holding itself at a certain tension for a very long time and has just received the signal that the tension is allowed to release. All of them, Rice said. All of them. Rice was quiet. Not the heavy, careful silence of 4 weeks ago. Something different. The silence of a person who is processing something they have been told was possible, but had not allowed themselves to fully believe because hope had cost them too much before and they had not been able to afford to spend it again. Wall, she said. 18 months. Permanent bar from federal service. Convicted on all 3 counts. Kara paused. He is never processing another conduct complaint for anyone. Rice made the sound again. The small, involuntary one. The sound that had no name in English, because English did not have a word for the specific sensation of being believed after a long time of not being believed, of having something taken from you, finally returned and confirmed as real. I need you to know something, Rice said. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of effort, the steadiness of a person holding themselves together because they have decided they are not going to come apart in this particular moment, even though the moment would permit it. After the separation form, after I left, I spent 6 weeks thinking I was the one who had done something wrong. I went over every decision I had made in that complaint process, every word I had written, every time I had gone back to Wall's office for an update. I was trying to find the thing I had done that made it not work. She stopped. It took me 6 weeks to stop doing that. Kara did not fill the silence. I want to come back, Rice said. I want my record corrected, and I want to come back to service. Park has your reinstatement case built, Kara said. She has been building it since the morning after the incident. Your separation was fraudulent. Your complaint was valid and directly contributed to a federal courts-martial. Your record will reflect all of that before the end of the week. She paused. Where you go from there is yours. I want Fort Calder, Rice said. Kara was quiet for a moment. That is a specific choice. I know it is specific, Rice said. I do not want to go somewhere else and pretend it did not happen here. I want to come back to the base where I filed 6 complaints that went nowhere. And I want to do my job. And I want every person on that base to know that the woman who got pushed out came back. Her voice did not waver. That matters. It matters to the women who are still there. And it matters to me. Kara thought about Torres filing her complaint at 07:07, 7 minutes after the intake channel opened. About Yates submitting 3 pages at 09:43, with a final sentence that Park had not removed from the record. About the junior handler who had dropped her clipboard on the training floor and calculated for 4 seconds before picking it up, because she had learned that being seen doing ordinary things could be dangerous. I will tell Park, Kara said. She will make it happen. Rice exhaled. Long, slow. The specific exhale of a person who has been breathing carefully for 4 months and has just remembered that they are allowed to use their full lung capacity. Thank you, she said. I know that is not a big enough word.
"It is the right word," Kara said. "That is enough." She ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Ajax put his chin on her knee. She put her hand on his head, and they stayed that way for a while, without either of them needing anything more from the moment than what was already in it. The last thing Kara did before she left Fort Calder was walk the annex corridor one final time. It was 1600 hours, full base activity. The lights in the corridor were running clean on every node, all of them. No flickering, no gaps, no awaiting parts notation in the maintenance log. The cameras were operational and logged and transmitting to a server that now routed simultaneously to an OSD oversight archive that no single base administrator could access or modify without a dual authorization process that Park had written into the new conduct infrastructure personally. Kara walked the corridor at an ordinary pace, Ajax at her left heel. The bleach smell was gone. The corridor smelled like nothing specific, which was what a corridor was supposed to smell like. She stopped at the bench near the far end.
The words were still there. Should have stayed quiet. She looked at them for a long moment. She had thought about covering them, sanding them down, having the bench replaced. She had decided against all of it the same morning she had made the decision, which was the morning after the incident, when she was sitting in Park's kitchen, looking at 11 complaint files that had been in a drawer for 14 months. She left them because they were evidence, not of what had happened to one person in one corridor on one night. Evidence of what a system produces when it decides that managing discomfort is more important than documenting truth. Evidence of what gets left behind when a woman has no other surface to put what she knows on. Evidence that someone was here, and something was done to her here, and she found a way to say so even when every official channel had been closed. That needed to stay visible, not as a monument to what had gone wrong, as a record that said it had been seen and named and answered. She stood at the bench for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked out of the corridor. Ajax walked beside her in the exact rhythm he had held for 3 years. Not ahead, not behind. Exactly where she was. Park was waiting at the entrance to the annex building. She had a folder in her hand and the expression of a person who has one more thing to say and has been deciding how to say it. "Rice's reinstatement order is signed," Park said. "Effective Monday. Fort Calder assignment confirmed." She held out the folder. "I also want you to have this." Kara opened it. It was a letter. Formal header. Park's signature at the bottom. Addressed to the Joint Forces Command Oversight Board and copied to OSD. It was a formal commendation for the design and execution of the sealed inspection at Fort Calder, citing specifically the evidence chain construction, the protected intake architecture, and the outcome of the courts-martial proceedings. At the bottom, below the formal language, Park had written 4 additional lines in her own hand. 11 complaints. 14 months. 0 reached my desk. That ends here. What you built in this building will outlast both of us, and that is exactly what it was supposed to do. Kara read it twice. She closed the folder. "You did not have to write that," she said. "No," Park said. "I wanted to." She looked at Kara directly. "You came into this base with sealed orders and a German shepherd, and you walked into a corridor at 2 in the morning, and you made sure the whole thing was recorded and documented and airtight before anyone had a chance to manage it into something smaller." She paused. "I have been a legal officer for 19 years. I have seen what happens when this kind of case gets mishandled. When the evidence is soft, or the chain is broken, or the victim is the one who ends up defending herself instead of the men who hurt her. She held Kara's eyes. That did not happen here. That did not happen here because you did not give it room to happen. Kara looked at Ajax. Ajax was watching Park with the calm, amber-eyed attention he gave to people he had decided were worth being present for. She thought about Rice at a hardware store in Savannah, going over every decision she had made in the complaint process, trying to find what she had done wrong. She thought about Torres waiting 7 minutes after the intake channel opened to file something she had been composing in her head for 6 months. About Yates writing 3 pages at 09:43, with a final line that said she was sorry it took someone else walking into the corridor. She thought about the bench and the words pressed into the grain, and the woman who had needed to leave them there because there was nowhere else to put what she knew. It was always going to hold, Kara said. The case, the evidence, the women who filed. She looked at Park. They built it. I just made sure it could not be buried again. Park nodded once, the nod of a person who understood the distinction and intended to carry it. They stood there for a moment, in the particular quality of silence that belongs to work that is finished, and finished correctly. The silence that does not need to be filled, because everything that needed to be said has been said, and everything that needed to be done has been done. And what remains is simply the fact of it, solid and complete, and no longer possible to take back. Kara picked up her bag. Ajax stood. She walked to the vehicle, and he walked beside her, and they left Fort Calder the way they had arrived. No fanfare, no reception. Just a woman and her dog moving through a base that was not the same base it had been 11 days ago, and would not be the same base going forward. Because something had been seen and named and answered, and the record now said so permanently. Some missions ended with an explosion and a cleared objective, and a flight home before sunrise. This one ended with a corridor that finally had working cameras, a woman in Savannah packing a bag to come back to the job that had been taken from her, and 11 complaints that would never again disappear into a drawer, because a legal officer named Park had built a reporting structure that did not run through a single point of failure. It ended with words pressed into a bench that nobody sanded down. It ended with the right people finally unable to look away. And it started because a 22-year-old woman walked into a corridor that 4 men had decided was theirs, and stood there until they showed her everything she needed, and a German shepherd with amber eyes had been right about every single thing from the first second to the last. That was not a small ending. That was the only ending that ever mattered. If this story moved something in you tonight, drop your city in the comments right now. And if you believe that silence was never the same thing as safety, type Amen below. Subscribe and stay with us because the next story is already waiting, and it is one that needs to be told.